5 things you almost definitely don't know. 3 of them, I'm guessing, unless you go to my church all the time, in which case you probably do. Number 5. Jesus probably didn't carry the whole cross. Usually when you see Jesus walking down the road, he's carrying like the whole thing behind him. But typically in the Roman Empire, you would carry just the crossbeam. You'd carry the shorter part of the cross, and the larger part of the cross would already be set in place. So you'd carry it from point A to point B. So unfortunately, all that artwork, it really should be just a crossbeam he's holding over his shoulders. He probably didn't have the full thing over his shoulder, dragging it like we usually see in the Renaissance art. Number 4. Jesus was completely naked when he was hung on the cross. Because of the art and also to protect the dignity, and I'm kind of glad they do this, usually when you see Jesus on a cross, he has a type of underwear or something on blocking his private parts. What we forget is that one of the horrible parts of crucifixion was that the crucified victim was always crucified completely naked. When young women were crucified, they would crucify them facing the cross in order that they wouldn't create any trouble. So this is one of the things that makes the cross really horrible, is that not only is the person dying, but this person is being publicly shamed as well. Number 3, the 2 men that hung on either side of Jesus were not thieves. First of all, thieves would not typically be executed. They'd be put in prison or beaten unless they had stolen from a king or something. And even then, if they had been executed, they would have been strangled to death or in some cultures beheaded, but certainly not crucified. The 2 men that hung at Jesus' side had to either be slaves or rebels, because those were the only 2 groups that were crucified. We feel pretty confident that they weren't slaves. It certainly would have mentioned that. More than likely, these were 2 zealots who wanted the Roman Empire out of Israel and were plotting some kind of, rebellion against the Roman Empire and were caught. And whether they're guilty or not, this is why they were being crucified. This is also an irony because Jesus, remember, did not want to lead a military revolt against Rome, and in fact even said, "Give unto Caesar what is Caesar's." So there's an actual historic irony that Jesus is crucified even though he was not necessarily supportive of the Roman Empire, but was supportive of peace and getting along while living in the Roman Empire. Number 2, and this is a big one, Jesus was not crucified on some distant hill way outside of the city. In fact, there are 3 rules that Romans have for crucifying. Rule number 1 is it has to be on a main road going in or out of the city. Number 2, it has to be at or near a gate to the city. And number 3, it has to be in a cursed place. Now we know that Jesus was brought to a place called Golgotha, and we know that he was brought to a hill. But remember, most military gates should be on a hill. Jesus was actually crucified on the road. So it would have been like, here's the road right here, and here would have been Jesus and those 2 guys right next to you. They would have been right at the gate where there would have been a lot of traffic and people coming in and out, and it would have been in a really cursed or ugly or horrible place just outside of the city. And that leads me to the number 1 thing most people don't know about the crucifixion, and that is that the Roman Empire required that you were crucified with your eyes at 5 feet above the ground. Now think about that for a minute. When we think about Jesus being crucified, we always picture him way up high on a 25 foot cross, sort of way up in the air, looking up at him. But if they followed the Roman custom, and they would have, Jesus would be right at eye level, right at walking level. The Roman Empire, as evil as they were, they would crucify children. So if a child was crucified, they would be brought up to 5 feet. And then if a tall man like me, I'm 6'3", I would have been considered a Celt or a Cimbri or a Pict or something like that. And so a giant like me in that day, I would have actually been brought down a foot and had my feet tucked under and nailed to the back of the cross. So more than likely, Jesus' feet were just, inches away from touching the ground when they were nailed to the cross. Now picture this, as we said before, they're on the road, they're right by the gate, and they would be at 5 feet looking at you in the eyes. I mean, you could literally reach out and hug Jesus if you were on the cross, if there weren't, Roman guards keeping you from doing that. So to me, that really paints a vivid picture that Jesus was not out in some distant place you would go to, but he was right there where everybody was collected, totally naked. His genitals and everything would have been out. He would have been bleeding. He would have been praying for his enemies. He would have been talking, and all of this, people would have been right there with probably just a Roman soldier between, them and Jesus. When we think about how Jesus paid the price for us, we remember the pain and the suffering that he went through. But we also remember that, maybe you're going through a difficult time right now, that he knows your pain and your suffering. We also trust that there's no sin that this sacrifice couldn't cover. That Jesus, who is the most perfect, totally perfect, God in the flesh, came to save us through this act of sacrifice for us. Maybe you're struggling with some sin or something in your past. I want you to know that there is no sin that Christ won't forgive, that God never gives up on us, and he can always turn your life around. Remember what St. Augustine said, there's no saint without a past, and there's no sinner without a future. Thanks so much for joining us, and don't forget, like and subscribe.